On a cold Tuesday morning in suburban Atlanta, Pastor Michael Harrison walked into his church office for what would be the last time. After 17 years of leading one of the fastest growing congregations in the Southeast, he quietly submitted his resignation letter, cleaned out his desk, and drove home. His wife found him sitting in their kitchen, staring at the wall, unable to explain why he felt like he was suffocating in the very calling that once gave him life. Michael isn't alone. In fact, he's part of a growing exodus that's reshaping American Christianity in ways most congregants never see. While churches focus on growing their membership rolls and building campaigns, there's a silent crisis unfolding in pastoral offices across the nation, one that threatens the very foundation of organized religion as we know it. The numbers are staggering, yet they remain largely hidden from public view. According to recent research from the Barna Group, approximately 42% of pastors have seriously considered quitting full-time ministry within the past year. That's not a typo. Nearly half of America's spiritual leaders are contemplating walking away from their pulpits permanently. Even more alarming, Lifeway research found that roughly 1,500 pastors leave the ministry each month in the United States alone. To put that in perspective, that's 50 pastors every single day choosing to abandon their calling. But here's what makes this crisis particularly devastating. These aren't failed ministers or scandal-ridden leaders making headlines. These are often the most dedicated, hardworking pastors, the ones who arrived early, stayed late, and poured their hearts into their congregations. They're leaving not because they've lost their faith, but because the modern pastoral role has become something entirely different from what they signed up for. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a former Methodist pastor who now counsels clergy in crisis, puts it bluntly. We're asking pastors to be CEOs, therapists, social media managers, event planners, fundraisers, and spiritual leaders all at once. Then we wonder why they're burning out at record rates. Mitchell herself left ministry after 23 years, not because she stopped believing, but because she realized the institutional demands had consumed the very calling that drew her to ministry in the first place. The transformation of pastoral expectations didn't happen overnight. 50 years ago, a pastor's primary responsibilities centered on preaching, teaching, and pastoral care. Today's pastors find themselves drowning in administrative duties, managing complex organizational structures, and navigating social media presence requirements that would challenge seasoned marketing professionals. Many seminaries, still operating with curricula designed for a bygone era, send new pastors into the field woefully unprepared for the business realities of modern church leadership. Consider the case of Pastor David Chen, who graduated from Princeton Theological Seminary in 2018 with degrees in divinity and biblical studies, but found himself spending 70% of his time managing budgets, coordinating volunteers, and troubleshooting technical issues for live-streamed services. I went to seminary to study scripture and care for souls, Chen explained in a recent interview. Instead, I became a customer service representative for an organization I no longer recognized. The financial pressures alone tell a sobering story. The median salary for pastors in America hovers around $50,000 annually, with many smaller church pastors earning significantly less. Meanwhile, they're expected to maintain graduate-level education, often carrying substantial student debt from seminary training. A 2023 study by the National Association of Evangelicals found that 56% of pastors work a second job to make ends meet, with many driving for rideshare companies or working retail jobs between sermons. But the financial strain pales in comparison to the emotional toll. The pandemic years revealed just how precarious pastoral mental health had become. Dr. Matt Bloom's comprehensive study at Notre Dame University found that pastors showed higher rates of depression, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion than the general population, even before COVID-19 added unprecedented challenges to their plates. When churches were forced to close their doors in 2020, pastors suddenly found themselves reinventing centuries-old practices overnight. They became video production experts, mastered online giving platforms, and learned to pastor through computer screens. Many discovered their congregation's true colors when tough decisions had to be made, with some of the most vocal critics being their most faithful attendees. Pastor Jennifer Walsh from Portland, Oregon, recalls the breaking point that led to her departure. I had congregation members screaming at me in the church parking lot because I followed health guidelines about masking. These were people I'd baptized, married, and buried loved ones for. In that moment, I realized I'd become a lightning rod for cultural wars rather than a shepherd for God's people. The isolation pastors experience compounds these challenges exponentially. Unlike other helping professions, pastoral ministry often demands a level of personal transparency that makes it difficult to seek help when struggling. Who does a pastor talk to when they're questioning their faith? How do they admit burnout to the very people who look to them for strength and guidance? Dr. James Bradford, a former Assemblies of God executive presbyter, explains the unique vulnerability pastors face. We've created an expectation of pastoral perfection that's not only unrealistic but destructive. Pastors are human beings with marriages, children, financial pressures, and personal struggles, yet we've placed them on pedestals that isolate them from the very community they're meant to serve. This isolation becomes particularly acute for pastors in smaller communities, where their every move is scrutinized and privacy is virtually non-existent. Pastor Tom Bradley, who led a rural church in Nebraska for 15 years before leaving ministry, describes the fishbowl effect. My kids couldn't misbehave at the grocery store without it becoming a church issue. My wife couldn't have a bad day without people questioning my leadership. We were expected to be the model Christian family 24/7, and that pressure eventually crushed us. The impact of pastoral departures extends far beyond individual congregations. Small communities often lose crucial social infrastructure when their pastor leaves. In many rural areas, pastors serve as informal counselors, community organizers, and social service coordinators. Their departure can leave significant gaps in community support systems. Moreover, the exodus is creating a dangerous feedback loop. As experienced pastors leave, remaining clergy face increased workloads and responsibilities, accelerating their own path toward burnout. Churches are being forced to rely more heavily on part-time or bivocational pastors, often resulting in reduced programming and community engagement. The demographic data reveals troubling trends about who's leaving. Research indicates that younger pastors are departing at disproportionate rates, with those under 45 being 3 times more likely to leave ministry permanently compared to their older counterparts. This brain drain is robbing churches of innovative thinking and fresh perspectives, precisely when they need them most to navigate cultural shifts and technological changes. Female pastors face additional challenges that compound the general crisis. Dr. Anna Park's research at Duke Divinity School found that women in ministry report higher rates of workplace harassment, unequal pay, and limited advancement opportunities compared to their male colleagues. The result is a devastating loss of gifted leaders who represent crucial diversity in theological perspective and pastoral approach. But perhaps most disturbing is what happens to pastors after they leave. Unlike other professions, there's no clear career transition path for former clergy. Seminary training, while rich in theological content, often provides few transferable skills for secular employment. Many former pastors struggle with identity crises, financial instability, and social isolation as they navigate life outside religious institutions. John Matthews, who left a successful megachurch pastorate in Texas to become a high school teacher, describes the transition. I went from being seen as a spiritual authority to explaining why my resume has a 15-year gap in conventional work experience. The skills I developed in ministry, public speaking, counseling, leadership, are valuable, but they're difficult to translate into corporate language. Some former pastors have found success in related fields like counseling, nonprofit management, or corporate chaplaincy. Others have started their own businesses or pursued entirely different career paths. However, the lack of institutional support for these transitions means many struggle through the process alone, adding another layer of trauma to an already difficult decision. The theological implications of this exodus deserve serious consideration. When pastors leave ministry, they're not just abandoning jobs, they're walking away from what they once believed was their divine calling. This creates profound spiritual crises that can take years to resolve. Some former pastors maintain their faith while rejecting institutional religion. Others experience complete deconstructions of their theological worldview. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, who studies religious leadership transitions, notes, the pastor exodus is forcing conversations about the sustainability of current church models. When your most dedicated leaders are burning out and leaving, it suggests systemic problems rather than individual failures. Hey there, Professor Archive community. I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? Drop a comment and let me know what profession you're in. I bet we have viewers from all walks of life experiencing this crisis in different ways. And if you're finding value in these deep dives into untold stories, consider leaving a super thanks to help keep these investigations going. The response from denominational leadership has been mixed and often inadequate. While some organizations have implemented wellness programs and sabbatical policies, many continue operating under outdated models that prioritize institutional preservation over pastoral well-being. The disconnect between denominational expectations and pastoral reality has created a trust gap that's driving even more leaders away. Progressive denominations have begun experimenting with alternative models. Some churches are embracing team-based leadership structures that distribute traditional pastoral responsibilities among multiple people. Others are exploring bivocational ministry as a sustainable long-term model rather than a temporary compromise. However, these innovations remain exceptions rather than the rule. The economic implications extend beyond individual churches to entire denominational structures. As congregations lose pastors and struggle to find replacements, many are closing or merging with neighboring churches. Denominational budgets, which depend on church contributions, are shrinking accordingly. Seminary enrollment has declined significantly over the past decade, suggesting the pipeline of future pastors is also drying up. Yet within this crisis lies opportunity for meaningful reform. Some of the most innovative and sustainable church models are emerging from congregations that have been forced to reimagine ministry after losing traditional pastoral leadership. These communities are rediscovering the biblical concept of shared ministry, where spiritual gifts are distributed throughout the congregation rather than concentrated in a single individual. The story of Grace Community Church in Denver illustrates this transformation. After their pastor of 12 years left due to burnout, rather than immediately seeking a replacement, the congregation spent 18 months exploring what ministry could look like without traditional pastoral hierarchy. They discovered that lay members had gifts for preaching, counseling, and leadership that had been underutilized. When they eventually called a new pastor, it was to serve as one member of a collaborative leadership team rather than the singular authority figure. Technology is also enabling new models of pastoral care and spiritual leadership. Some former pastors are finding ways to continue ministry through online platforms, podcasts, and virtual counseling services. These models often provide greater work-life balance and financial sustainability than traditional church positions. The mental health profession has taken notice of the pastoral crisis, with several organizations now offering specialized services for clergy and former clergy. The Clergy Recovery Network, founded by former pastors, provides support groups, career transition resources, and mental health services specifically designed for religious leaders. These organizations are filling gaps that denominational structures have largely ignored. International perspectives provide additional context for understanding this uniquely American crisis. Countries with state-supported religious institutions often see lower rates of pastoral burnout and departure. Similarly, cultures with different expectations for religious leadership report more sustainable ministry models. This suggests that the American pastoral crisis is at least partially a product of specific cultural and economic conditions, rather than inherent problems with religious vocation itself. The impact on seminary education has been particularly profound. Enrollment in Master of Divinity programs has declined by over 30% in the past decade, forcing many institutions to close or dramatically restructure their programs. Those that survive are being forced to reckon with the gap between their academic training and the practical realities of contemporary ministry. Some seminaries are responding by incorporating business training, mental health awareness, and practical ministry skills into their curricula. Others are exploring alternative credentialing paths that don't require the time and debt investment of traditional degree programs. However, these changes are happening slowly while the crisis continues to accelerate. The generational divide among pastors reflects broader cultural shifts that churches are struggling to navigate. Younger pastors often arrive with different expectations about work-life balance, authority structures, and social justice priorities. When these expectations clash with traditional church cultures, conflict is almost inevitable. Many young pastors report feeling caught between progressive values and conservative congregations, creating unsustainable tension. Pastor Maria Santos, who left ministry at age 32 after 5 years of service, explains, I was told that ministry required total sacrifice of time, family, personal interests, even mental health. But I watched that mentality destroy the pastors who came before me. I decided I wouldn't perpetuate that cycle. The Exodus has also revealed the extent to which pastoral roles have become gendered in problematic ways. Male pastors often report feeling pressure to be stoic providers and decisive leaders, while female pastors face criticism for being either too soft or too assertive. These impossible standards contribute to the mental health crisis affecting clergy across gender lines. Family dynamics add another layer of complexity to pastoral departures. Pastoral families often experience unique stresses, from financial insecurity to public scrutiny to social isolation. Children of pastors, sometimes called preachers' kids or PKs, report higher rates of anxiety, depression, and religious skepticism compared to their peers. When pastors leave ministry, they're often motivated as much by concern for their family's well-being as their own. The geographic dimension of the pastoral crisis reveals interesting patterns. Rural churches are disproportionately affected, both because they typically offer lower compensation and because pastoral families in small towns face greater social pressures. Urban churches, while often better resourced, present their own challenges, including higher cost of living and more complex social dynamics. Regional denominational differences also play a significant role. Conservative evangelical denominations report some of the highest pastoral turnover rates, while liturgical traditions with stronger institutional support systems tend to retain pastors longer. However, no denomination has been immune to the broader trends affecting American religious leadership. The role of social media in pastoral stress cannot be understated. Modern pastors are expected to maintain professional online presences while navigating the potential pitfalls of public platforms. A poorly worded Facebook post or controversial tweet can become a church crisis overnight. Many pastors report feeling constantly on stage in ways previous generations never experienced. Looking ahead, several trends suggest the pastoral exodus will continue and potentially accelerate. Younger generations are increasingly skeptical of institutional religion, reducing the pool of potential pastoral candidates. Economic pressures on churches are likely to intensify as demographic shifts continue. Climate change and other global challenges will place additional demands on pastoral leadership, while resources remain constrained. However, the crisis is also forcing necessary conversations about the sustainability and effectiveness of current church models. Some of the most vibrant religious communities are those that have moved beyond traditional pastoral hierarchies toward more collaborative and distributed leadership structures. These experiments may point toward more sustainable futures for religious institutions. The story of Pastor Michael Harrison, mentioned at the beginning, illustrates both the tragedy and potential hope within this crisis. After leaving his Atlanta congregation, Harrison spent 2 years working in nonprofit management while processing his experience. He's now serving as a ministry consultant, helping churches develop healthier leadership models and supporting pastors through transition periods. His journey from burnout to recovery to meaningful service suggests possibilities for redemption within this broader crisis. As we document this silent exodus, it's crucial to remember that behind every statistic is a human story. Someone who felt called to serve, invested years in training and service, and ultimately decided they could no longer continue in their role. These departures represent not just institutional challenges, but profound personal and spiritual journeys that deserve our attention and compassion. The pastoral crisis reflects broader cultural tensions about authority, community, and meaning in contemporary American life. As traditional institutions struggle to maintain relevance and sustainability, The experience of pastors offers insights into challenges facing all kinds of community leaders. Their stories of burnout, disillusionment, and sometimes renewal provide a lens for understanding larger questions about how we organize society around shared values and mutual care. This silent exodus is reshaping American Christianity in real time, forcing congregations, denominations, and religious leaders to confront uncomfortable questions about sustainability, expectations, and the future of institutional religion. While the crisis is undeniable, it's also creating space for innovation, renewal, and perhaps more authentic expressions of spiritual community. The conversation about pastoral well-being and church sustainability is far from over. As more pastors share their stories and more congregations experiment with alternative models, we're likely to see continued evolution in how American Christianity organizes itself around spiritual leadership. Whether this evolution leads to healthier, more sustainable religious communities or further institutional decline remains to be seen. What's certain is that the silent exodus of pastors is no longer silent, and its impact will be felt in American religious life for generations to come. The question now is whether religious institutions will adapt quickly enough to address the underlying causes, or whether the exodus will continue until it fundamentally transforms the landscape of American spirituality. Thank you for joining me on Professor Archive for this deep dive into a crisis hiding in plain sight. The stories behind these statistics matter, and they deserve our attention. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeking the truth behind the headlines.